we don't have microphones. Sir, can you hear us in the back?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Are we streaming this?
Do you need the mics on, Scott?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Okay, we'll wait then.
Everything's turned on,
Oh, it is, yeah.
so you should be okay.
All right. I'd like to call a school board meeting, the special meeting to order. I don't think that, I see Toby, can we do the roll call? Second.
Peter Turk,
Here.
Barry Smeal,
Here.
Marla Brown,
Here.
Taylor Shaw,
Here.
Kevin Bird,
Here.
Roseanne Hahn,
Here.
Susan Kessler.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we have a pretty short agenda tonight. The first topic and these are all items for discussion, board communication with the public. And this is open discussion for the board, but there's a couple of topics I thought would be good to discuss. One is process improvements for our public comments. In other words, is there a better way we can do this? And the second topic is how we can better respond to questions or comments from the public. So again, open ideas. I have some thoughts on how we can do this. I'll start by saying this, public comments in general, they're not legally required, but they are very important. In fact, we have a policy that says that communications to the public is an intent to the board, and it's a two-way communication that we need to maintain. Historically, we've taken public comments from people verbally only at our monthly meetings, and we've done them near the beginning of the meeting, which has worked well. But we've noticed in the past year that this has maybe not been the best process. Both in November of 2020 and more recently, when we had disruptions in our meetings, they perhaps could have been avoided if we had a better process for public comments, because I think both issues were going to be addressed later in the board meeting. So that I've given a lot of thought to this and talked to a lot of other people about how we can improve. There's no reason we have to do what we're doing right now. We're free as a board to decide our different protocol. A couple ideas that came up. One was from Dan Bocock, I believe, or some folks on the administrative staff, was we could hold a listening session. Let's say we have it like on Thursday night before the monthly board meeting on the following Monday. The key there would be to get the agenda posted though, so people would know what the agenda was on before the listening session. I think that idea has a lot of merit, and that the only agenda item during the listening session would be public comments. We could hear, and that would give us time as board members to hear and digest comments from the public, and then we would take action. Another idea, I'm borrowing shamelessly from the city here, but I talked to John Schultz, who's the council president there. The way the city handles them is public comments are done by agenda item. So let's say you have agenda item X, and if somebody has come to the meeting from the public, they give their comment only during that agenda item. And we could decide how the order goes, but typically they have the administration first give a presentation, if there's going to be one. The board maybe has discussion on that agenda topic. Public comments are held then on that item. And then the board either takes action or preferably delays action to a future meeting. So again, so the board members can digest all the information and then make a reasoned decision if time allows. There's going to be times where the board has to take action because it's an imminent or it's an urgent matter. So those are two ideas on how we could take public comments. On how you handle off-agenda items can be done one of two ways then. If you use the city's model, you either have a session, you have a time period either at the beginning or maybe near the end of the meeting where public can bring any off-agenda items forward. Or I talked to Bob Butler, he's a counsel at the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, about this, and I also attended a seminar that Bob and Louise Blankenheim gave. And one of their suggestions, and other boards do this around the state, is that items that are not on the agenda are only allowed by email, so through our board comments. So that's another way another idea. But I'm open to ideas from the board, but I think we should change how we're doing public comments right now, because it's not working ideally. Anybody else on the board have, it's enough talking for me, anybody else on the board have ideas?
Yeah, I think probably one of the better ones would be having a separate meeting just for public comments, say like Thursday, as you mentioned. That way it gives board time to digest the information from the public, take time to research on their own, additional time, whatever. So I'm kind of in favor of that. I'm really in favor of breaking it down by each agenda item, because it depends what the topic is. You could have upwards of 20 people speaking on 3 different topics, it's 3 minutes apiece. That's just being conservative, but you could be here until 12 o'clock at night and still not even get through 3 or 4 of the agenda items. So I think just setting aside one separate meeting just for public comment, I think is appropriate. I think it would go a long way, but that's just me.
Would this Thursday meeting be off agenda items as well?
We could decide that, Kevin. It's really what we want to do. But I think it would be, well, we can decide that, right? It could be either one.
And it would have time, on it?
We currently have a policy, it's 1 hour. Unless we change our policy, we abide by that. It's 1 hour unless the board votes to extend the time period. One downside of this listening session is that the public may not, they may not have heard what the administration is going to present. So for example, at the August 9th meeting, our administration was going to do a presentation on the mask issue, which I think was a big topic that the public was interested in. The public hadn't had a chance to hear the administration's presentation on our COVID mitigation strategies before the comments. So that, that's a plus or minus of how you do it. Yeah, Roseanne.
Well, I was just talking to some other board members in the state, and some of them have the comments at the end of the meeting. So they have to sit through the whole meeting, but at the very end of the meeting, they have that. And another one is just going to start this because they've got some problems. The comments have to come in online. So that can only be online or virtual. They cannot come. They're not going to be here in person. I'm not suggesting either one, but I'm saying this is what 2 other boards in the state are doing.
Okay, so
Yeah, this is a good chance. Let me just say this, I think we're right now, we're just kind of brainstorming ideas. We're not necessarily saying how we're going to do it.
Right.
sure, accepting public comments at the end of the meeting after votes are taken, I think it's ridiculous how they do that process. It's stupid.
Well, what it could be, Taylor, though, it could be, let's say it's an item that is not yet voted on. I agree with your saying, if you're giving a public comment after a vote's been taken, ideally as a board, we can hear things in one meeting and then put it off to the next meeting to be voted on, because that gives us all time to maybe do additional research or listen to the folks in the community. It's pretty rare where we have to actually take action that night. We usually can wait another meeting.
If we, and I don't know if you can do this by meeting, but if we know it's a hot topic, you have the presentation in the public comments area, but no board action is taken until the board meeting on Monday. So for example, the COVID discussion, administration would give their presentation, public comments would take place after it. And then the vote, the board discussion and vote would come on Monday after the fact. And I don't know if that would be, obviously it's gonna make the regular board meeting shorter because you're not gonna do the presentation again. Maybe a Cliff Notes version. So if, the length of Thursday would potentially be longer and Monday would be potentially shorter, but it kind of gives you a hybrid of what the city's doing and what Dan suggested. Just a thought. I mean, obviously we can try a couple different things to see. Because you're gonna have some Thursdays where there's gonna be virtually no public comment on the agenda.
I see the virtue in that. That does make sense. I guess I want to talk to Steve and the other administrative staff if that works. I mean, it could be, and not every topic's going to need an administrative presentation.
Right.
Certain ones.
I think though too, also, we shouldn't really go through if it's not, I'm sorry, what did you say, it's a non-agenda item, it's on they send them over email.
Yeah.
Their boards. I think that's kind of how we got into the perception that we're in. We should,
I'm not saying we should do that.
I know,
I'm just saying
I'm
that
just
this
saying.
is what other boards are doing.
sure, I understand the circumstances of that, I don't know what the circumstances are for those boards and those districts and what's going on there. I just know what's happening here, and I don't think we should follow suit with that.
But
Again, I know it's not your suggestion.
One discussion is, if it's not an agenda item, we're not gonna make a decision on it. So public comment via email would be perfect. And then when it becomes an agenda item, we're actually gonna take action, potentially the following week. Then public comment are open, and we'll have somewhat of a dialogue of what they're thinking. And that presentation would be helpful at that point.
I like your first idea, presentations on the Thursday and public comments on the Thursday. I think if you're doing public comments on Thursday and then again before the vote on the next, that's.
No, I don't think we can do that. I think there's an allotment for the presentation and the public comments on Thursday, agenda items of, agenda items, period. And it gives us a chance to digest what we're going to be potentially voting on Monday, if we haven't had time to see the presentation or watch the presentation or listen to the presentation.
Because these will all be live streamed either way. So,
Susan, you have some?
So would this Thursday session be the Thursday before the monthly meeting? Is that what you're?
I think that was Dan's idea. I'm not gonna take credit for it. I think it's a good idea. Yeah, I think it'd be the immediate Thursday before, let's say, a second Monday in each month. But we're open to ideas, if you have other ideas.
The first Thursday.
Yeah. I think that the key would be that the agenda would be put out several days before that Thursday meeting, so folks in the public would know what's on the agenda, and they would, I would encourage them to ideally, I think it'd be more helpful to have comments on agenda items, but you're talking about the non-agenda items.
And after a presentation. because
Yeah.
Then we have muted a lot of, there are a lot of the questions we already answered.
That's a good point.
And so the comments would be on the agenda items that have come out, and then the non-agenda items via email.
We can decide that as a board. I mean, you can either have a period where there's non-agenda items they can either bring them up then, or you could just say, some districts now are saying, and Bob Butler kind of, I don't know if you recommended it, he just said a lot of districts are going to non-agenda items or by email only. Because then that also gives the board a chance to think about those ideas, and maybe that becomes a future agenda item.
Yeah, and have a discussion about it at the next
Right.
meeting that day. What are our future agenda, what are our open issues? And it seems like we're getting a lot of information from the public about X, Y, or Z. We should make that an agenda item.
Exactly. And we're gonna talk about that a little bit here too, on how things get on the agenda, because I think that's important.
And there would be no public comment then at the monthly meeting.
Under this idea, I think that's correct.
That makes sense, if you do the listening session.
Bob,
Sense.
so the one thing that pops into my head is, okay, one, strongly in favor of designating a specific day for public comments, or a specific night. We may run into the problem of there may be people that want to say a comment but can't make that Thursday for whatever reason. Obviously, they still have the right and the ability to still eat. I just throw it out there.
No, I thought about that too, because Thursdays are typically a sports night, and it might be a challenge. Maybe they have a spokesperson, maybe somebody else presents on.
Sure.
I mean, we're all gonna have those issues on a Thursday night. Because there's,
Yeah, there's no magic in Thursday, that was just an idea.
no, right,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that Thursdays is typically a hot, if you look at most items, especially when you get into the winter. With basketball.
We could do it on a Monday, a week before the board meeting, but that,
Well, that's,
Well,
the only challenge is you start getting too far ahead, I think it'd be tough to come up with that.
But like to his point, the whole designee comment, I mean, that kind of could potentially feed into this other item, the public comment form. Or a designee, I mean, so.
yeah. I like public comment form too.
Yeah, I guess I can't say this enough personally. People email me. I actually find that somewhat more effective way to taking information. But I like to read. So it gives me time to, and I can go back and actually review it again. But
Well,
I do want to hear from people. It's
everybody's time is different, right? Like you were saying, we were talking about teachers. Some want to do it at 6 o'clock in the morning, some want to do it at 9 o'clock at night, some people wake up in the middle of the night and want to read.
Marlon, do you have thoughts on this?
I'm good with the agenda specific comments, and having that listening session, a few days before. I think that's definitely beneficial, so I have bought in on that. I know that there have been some other discussions around that before too, so, I think that, meets the needs, both from a public, standpoint of feeling like they're being heard and actually being heard, and then the actual, meeting where we act on it, so, I like that. I almost would prefer, off-topic, items to be at the end of the meeting, but that could be a logistical thing too, so,
At the end of the month, maybe?
yeah. But even so, if those off-topic items do particularly lead to agenda items, for the next time, that's where my hang-up would be, is that they not go into the ether and never resurface.
So also have been the same Thursday, do the agenda items first on the topic, afterwards on Thursday.
I like that too.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. The idea would be on Thursday during the listening session. If you have an agenda item, because right now we ask for what is your topic you're going to do. We do all the agenda items first during that listening session. And then time permitting, we go on to non-agenda items, public comments.
I like that. That's not a bad idea.
Yeah. It kind of solves the question of, I get people want to talk because they want to present their ideas.
And this is time limited.
We'd still have an hour limitation, unless we vote to go longer, we still are a 3-minute limitation.
I don't think we should get hung up on time limitation. We got abundance of folks that want to speak. We should- Again, I know we have a mechanism in place for vote, but,
Yeah, I think the time limit just,
it's a guide.
yeah, and when we're constantly hearing the same exact comment over and over and over and over, I mean, at some point it gets redundant,
Sure.
it gets boring,
Yeah, it's
not idiots.
So I'm hearing a consensus right now on the board to change our protocol to going to Thursday.
But again, that's not set in stone. If we find that isn't working, or we're having some pullback, we can always change it again.
Absolutely.
Good point, Taylor. I agree.
So
Yeah,
we're not.
It's gotta be fluid.
An executive or a constitutional amendment here.
absolutely not. No, this is,
Yeah.
I just thought this was a good chance for a discussion and then kind of like, let's see if we can do this better. And Steve, do you see any issues from an administrator standpoint on this? Are we missing something?
Pull it up, I was just gonna quickly pull up, to make sure that there may be something in policy that you have that outlines your meeting schedule. And so that would just have to be tweaked because those Thursdays will be meeting, and in essence would be meetings. Not a big hurdle, just something to pay attention to. And then the other piece that I think internally, again, not a problem per se, but something to be really conscious of, is that we may have to consider how we then post meetings. So we can post the agenda, and there may be supporting documents not yet available. So sometimes we have agenda items that happen on Monday. We know that statutorily by midday Friday, it's got to be available to the public. I don't know if those same documents might be ready on a Tuesday, now almost a week before. Sometimes we're waiting for, things like insurance quotes when we get into the spring, or we're waiting for, what's going to happen if DPI has got a ruling on something that we're waiting for. You're waiting for academic standards approval in July. You're waiting for the seclusion restraint report in October. So there are some things that we can list as an agenda item, and we can say, if there's something you want to comment on, and also let people know that perhaps all supporting documents are not yet available. And so I think we would just have to be really open about that,
Yeah.
that we do, always do the very, very best we can. But there might be something in there that from time to time isn't quite ready, particularly when it comes to financials. And I think about Ruth, that oftentimes we want to wait to the very last moment to post all the financials so that they're as up to date as possible. That's just, I mean, that's good practice in terms of being transparent. So other than that, I don't know that there'd be any barrier to that per se. Certainly, you know, something that I'll check on our policies.
Anything else on this one? So right now, just to summarize, I'm hearing a change of protocol where we go to a Thursday open meetings, public listening session. The agenda will be posted prior to that meeting, properly noticed. So people, the public would know what's going to be discussed at the monthly board meeting. We would take agenda items first from the public. If the administration has a presentation, that would go first. We would back that up. Then we would hear the agenda items from the public, and then if time permitting, we hear non-agenda items. And we can always vote to extend that, like as our policy on that session. And then I think it will shorten our monthly board meetings, and we'll have time to discuss and take action. I think it's a better protocol.
So I think we should have agenda items that need presentation and discretion of all presidents and superintendent. We're not going to do presentations on every single item on
Yeah,
the agenda.
absolutely.
Things that are deemed, I think should be.
In fact,
That's what the president presents on.
In fact, to be clear, I think it's actually more the exception than the rule that we have presentation. We don't present on many agenda items.
And also, I don't know if it ties into this or where it falls in, but it falls in one. We gotta do something about the board comments. It's either gotta go or we gotta change it or something. Because, I mean, I understand it's somewhat confusing for people that haven't used it before for the first time, but it's been explained repeatedly over and over, and people still aren't getting it.
What do you mean?
No, they don't apply to board comments.
Yeah, hang on. I think we're gonna get to that in part two, because I want to wrap up this part one. I just want to talk about our agenda items quickly. I hear you, that's something I wanted to address. I wanted to talk though about how things get on the agenda, and it's in our policies already. Essentially, it's the board president working with the superintendent. I listen to, obviously I take in input from board members of the public also, but there's some discretion. But this was enlightening too. We are very careful about making sure we meet open meetings law, but I want to make sure that I'm being responsive to people on the board. It is allowed, Bob Butler told me, if I can put out a poll by email, for example, on agenda items, that's one way we can determine if they're agenda items. But I guess I'd ask board members to talk to me. If you have agenda items you want on there, let me know. I think that's probably the best system. And then if there's a member of the public that has something, that's maybe something that we work on a poll. Because as a board, we decide what goes on the agenda. And if there are any thoughts on that?
I like that idea.
Okay.
You get a lot of feedback and let's have a poll.
Yeah, and the poll is just that. It's just yes or no. It's not discussion on the agenda item, which would be a violation of meetings law. Because I did hear, I mean, there's times where we hear from people in the public that have ideas and we never really get back to them. So I feel like we're not being responsive as we could be. And then the board decides, if we decide not to take up that agenda item, well, you decided that's not something that's a priority at this time. It could be in the future, but it's not at this point. Everyone?
Well, it could be an administrative nightmare, but I'd like to see it for both. Because I don't like the idea that the board president has sole discretion over who gets an item on the agenda. I mean, obviously my district-wide philosophy stance is it's gone down several times.
I haven't mentioned it. He's joking for the public.
No, but I mean, I think if someone on the board wants something on the agenda, I think the board should decide. We want to bring this up or we want to pass it. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, and that'd be efficient, because I've taken a stance right now where I've talked to all the board members, and I feel like if you've had an agenda item, let's get it out there. As a board, maybe we don't want, we should maybe have a discussion or we have a poll, say yes or no, we want to have that as agenda. It's not a bad idea. Let's see how it goes, Barry. I think for members of the public, I'll use the poll for now, but, and then I guess just one more thing too. There are times too, I think, where we haven't been responsive to the public, whether it's a question or a comment. Hearing things on a Thursday and then being able to respond to them on Monday might not be a bad thing. So we have to be careful about how we do that too, because it has to be on the agenda. Yeah, I know, I get it, that there has to be open meetings. Please.
Just as a reminder, on the agenda items piece, as you're talking momentarily, that is policy 166. It talks about how things get on the agenda. But in essence, that is controlled by Peter, generally speaking, and the way that it's spelled out there. Like he would say, hey, Steve, the board would like to talk about X, Y, or Z. We would prep that accordingly. And so if he were to poll board members or however you would do that, it still matches with what you have said in policy for how you want to do that. So just to kind of reinforce it's well within the latitude of the policy as you have it written currently.
So we don't have to amend the policy.
Correct.
Anything else on the agenda? We can move on. Okay. Part two, and this isn't, I'm open to other ideas, but this is the idea of how can we better respond to questions or comments from the public. So right now, Barry just touched on this. We take emails from people. They're to be directed to a board member personally. We also take emails through public comment, through board comments, which are directly to the board. And then we also hear questions during the public verbal comments during meetings. As we've been discussing over the past few months, we do not respond as a board to questions because they need to be on the agenda and the board needs to talk about them. And we're an entity, we're not individuals. But I think that is frustrating for folks in the public because they don't feel like we're either listening or being responsive. I guess that's something I'd like to think about, how we can better respond to folks' questions.
Well, if they're going through board comments or through our board email, we could have an automatic reply set up, just like they do for trying to email customer service at American Express.
And we actually put that in. We have an auto reply now that says.
I know we're working on it.
Yeah. I guess one other thought that came up in this topic too is the idea of a spokesperson. This is something that WASB recommended. And actually it's in our policy that typically the superintendent is your spokesperson for most matters, or somebody that Steve would appoint, or someone on the board if it's a board question. And our policy says it's the board president. That doesn't mean necessarily I speak for the board with my own opinions, but I would only specify or speak on matters that the board has decided. Every board member, though, has a right to speak to the public. But Bob Butler had some good thoughts on this, that the idea that is, if you're a board member, you have to show extreme caution in responding individually, because you may not be speaking with the majority view of the board. It's especially important where you're talking about an item that's still up for discussion. Legal, and there's two different concepts here. There's the legal concept and then there's best practices or board governance. Legally, you have a First Amendment right to say anything. And it's good to use the disclaimer that many of us use, that these are your comments from yourself. But as a matter of best practice or board governance, it's better if the board speaks with a unified voice. Board members, though, who are in the minority on an issue are certainly welcome to explain why they voted differently than the rest of the board. But Bob's best practice is that the board speaks with one voice. And that's where the idea of a spokesperson comes from.
So I think I brought this up once before when Steve was trying to run the district and really was being a spokesperson for everybody that was sending emails. I recommended that we have a communications director, that person is, obviously Steve still has to review it, but he wouldn't have to spend a lot of time trying to think through that process, allow her to, she's a communication expert. If we have a comment on a topic like that, maybe we forward our comments to her, and she then puts out the communication to the response.
Are you talking about an individual email from somebody, Kevin, or?
Yeah, whatever the items that you're referring to. I mean, if they're items that they're at the Thursday listening session, and it's not an agenda item, that would be the place that communication would come from, or communications. Right. Just so that, I mean, obviously Steve's gonna be involved, and other staff potentially will be, but their job is to run the district, not necessarily in admin and communication.
Yeah. I guess I'm open to ideas here, but I just feel like right now, we're not really responding to anybody.
Right, right, if you look at companies around our area, it's typically not the president of the company. Patrick Lynch is not responding to you. It's coming from his communications.
I like the idea, I guess I'm questioning if the comments are directed at the board hasn't met or discussed it. Do you want the communications person putting out the stance of the board before we even talk?
I don't know, I mean, I know Steve responds to a lot of emails and they're directed towards Steve and the board. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. It's just a thought process.
Well, I think there's two different types of communications we receive too. There's comments that we get from people that don't necessarily require an answer. And I think on those, to give somebody an acknowledgement, hey, if you received your email, thank you for sending it, would be a wise practice. Right now, we're not necessarily doing that. So somebody sends a board comment, they get back a disclaimer from us saying that we don't respond.
Right, so like a resume, you first don't know whether you even saw the resume.
Yeah, so I think that's something I'd like to see. I think that'd be easy. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we could do a point a board member to do that, or, do it on a rotation basis, or somehow we come up with a way to just, again, it's just thank you for sending your
Something,
message.
yeah, something more than the automatic reply.
Now, the second part is the question. If you're gonna have a substantive question to the board or to the administration, how do you handle that? Right now, Steve replies to questions on that are all administrative.
Well, could they, if our policy on the poll was effective,
Mhm.
the response could be simply, we pulled this discussion, and the board is gonna take it up at the next board meeting, or the board is gonna delay action on this for a future board meeting. Because we really can't give an opinion.
Right? Until the boards decide.
And I think if it's an administrative issue, whatever's easiest for Steve, I just thought it would give him, take some of the weight off his shoulders to have our communications director, Julie, respond to that.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's Steve, or there's gonna be issues that only Steve can reply to. And it really gets up to him when
Yeah, I
he
mean,
delegates it to
I'm just throwing out the discussion. I don't know the right answer.
Well, I feel like Steve, most of us have been judicious when we need to reply. Steve's not going to reply to every single email that comes in. I certainly wouldn't reply to every single email that comes in, so often. But clearly when there's an agenda item or it's a topic that is pertinent to the district's operation, there should probably be some sort of reply. If this goes back to my comments about four comments, it's either got to go or you have to let people reply to it.
You say people need board members.
Board members. Yeah, I agree. I mean, right now, if you get an email that's got your personal district address on it and board comments on it, you're not supposed to be replying. Because it was sent to board comments.
I know, and that it doesn't make any sense to me either, Gary. I know districts do this, where you designate one board member, maybe you rotate every month, and you say, this month it's your month, Taylor, right? When someone sends a comment, just acknowledge, what? I don't mind, no, I mean, I'm talking about, again, I'm not talking about substantive answers to questions.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, thank you for your email. And, because I think we all have a responsibility.
Thank you for your email, maybe behind the scenes.
Yeah. Maybe Kevin, we're gonna skip your month, Kevin.
See you, John.
So I'd like to see us do that, Barry, to every email that we get. That's essentially a comment. Most of them are, they're comments.
I mean, I'll just say for me, obviously I respond to a lot of emails. There's no question about that. If there's ever any type of question that I don't know, or I feel it's not appropriate for me to respond, I always copy you and the applicable administrator, which obviously Steve, on that forward them on. Typically, my responses to folks are, thanks again for reaching out. I mean, just a generic response. It's not meant to be a canned response, but it's typically what it is. There's never any type of collusion or malicious intent, whatever. It's just to let them know, thank you, this is actually been received. And some people agree or disagree with that, that's fine. That's, you know, I have our opinions, but I think the main point is that perception is, okay, we have board comments, the board doesn't respond. Citizens come and speak before the meetings, the board doesn't respond. That, I think, is the underlying issue here. And, you know, quite frankly, I think, you know, some people, to Barry's point, I don't respond to every email, I respond to a lot of them, but there are some emails that come through that you're not gonna talk to me or anybody else on the stage like that, quite frankly, so you're not gonna get a response. So, again,
I like the idea of just a simple response. We received your comments. We're thinking about it. We have a polling process. And we keep it posted. I think that keeps it simple and,
Who should do it, Kevin?
but if you want to rotate it.
Yeah.
I think that might be complicated.
It might be.
Say, you know, you've got September,
Yeah.
you got August. But if you want to try that, you can try that.
okay, so the first thing that pops in my head is to do that, there may be certain people that are more targeted than others. So that's just the perception. For me, that's the first image that pops in my head. If, you know, Peter has it this month, you know, he may not get anything. Marlo has it, he may get none tomorrow. You know, and that could just be for anybody. Or there could be scenarios where people are being specifically set up. And that's what I want to obviously avoid that for people on both sides of an issue.
Right.
So it's not targeting one group or the other. So,
Well, again, these are really supposed to be non-substantive
Sure.
responses that.
no, I understand, but
Because the board should
It's
wait
going
to.
to board comments.
Yeah.
It's not going to us individually. Correct?
Well, I think we should be responding regardless whether it's sent to board comments or to a board member, you know, we're all copied individually. Right now, Barry made a point that we have this distinction in our policy, which is kind of silly, doesn't make any sense.
Well, no, I think it makes sense at the time because you can't bring up on the agenda things.
No, but just to respond and acknowledge. Roseanne, Susan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, excuse me, my thought was that the person that maybe should respond would be the board clerk, because that could be part of his position, would be to do that, and that way we wouldn't have to rotate, and, because that gets really complicated, but,
I like
Yeah.
do that.
Marlo.
So now you want to lay this on me? I would almost be, I would be in favor of the board comments email going away. I mean, to Taylor's point, we have our special meeting on Thursday, we have our public comment, they don't get answered. They get no response from us then. They send us emails, and now they're getting a canned response. I don't respond to every email myself. The ones that I do, it's my comment, it's nothing. They know where I stand. I'm not unmovable, but at the same time, it's, you know, I understand where you're coming from. I share some of the same things. However, here's another perspective. So that's one of those opportunities to engage in that way, and I can respond on both emails, both the board comments and the personal, email accounts. You're pretty much just saying, keep talking to me, and if it makes it on the agenda, you'll know that I heard you. But if we go with the clerk, you know, responding to all the emails, there will definitely be a canned response.
I hear you.
Well, again, so I know I said this to you, Peter, but, and I said this kind of earlier, this is a new day, this is not the same board district it was 14 years ago. The climate has changed. I mean, it'd be nice if we could go back to 14 years ago, but that's just, it's never gonna happen. The way that the political climate is, the way that, you know, the social media and things like that, and we have to be more responsive either way.
And I can tell you that going back to 14 years ago, we had the 20 years of it now. We had the Saturday breakfast with the superintendent.
Yep.
And all the board members would be there. You would come there like, I went there for months on end, bringing up non-agenda items to get something on the agenda, and every board member would be sitting there. I never got a response, whether we were gonna do it or not, and I got frustrated. I mean, I can understand where these people are on this issue, because I was very frustrated. So finally, I ran for school board. So I at least get the response I was looking for. No.
So I'm struggling to hear a consensus with this one, but,
Well, ultimately, this is why I think the board comments email should go away. It ties our hands. If you want to email board members, they can email board members. Board members are free to respond at that point.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Why was the board comments instituted?
COVID.
Instated, because COVID?
yeah, we're meeting virtually.
Okay. Well,
The idea was a good one. I think it was to give people a easier forum to email the entire board. Just, we understand you can't be here personally to give us your comments. Here's essentially a virtual public comment.
Yeah, there was just one generic email, so you know, the public didn't type in 20 emails. You know, that's not, the intent was good.
But it's easy to set that up and go to our website, cut and paste, and make a group and get done.
Right, which is the same as board comments.
Right. And you call your own board comment.
So, yeah, I'm fine with board comments, that email ending.
Okay, if we do that, then we have a protocol on how we respond to people. At least to acknowledge when we get a comment. Because right now, I think it's haphazard.
I think that the tagline that many of you put on your emails is important. If you want to respond to something that's more than generic, to have dialogue with your constituents, I think that's your responsibility, but understand it comes with a fiduciary responsibility as well.
Well, going back to, I'll circle back, Kevin, to that point. That was Bob's, there's two different issues here. Bob Butler made this clear. There's a legal point. As a board member, you have a legal right under the First Amendment to respond. And it's good to use the disclaimer. You're making it clear that it's just your individual opinion. There's also a board governance thing, though. And he highly recommends that board members use extreme restraint when responding, especially on an issue that has not been taken up by the board yet. So that'd be I'll emphasize that again, you know, for all of us as a reminder, because we want to be responsive to our constituents, but we also have to understand we're an entity. So.
Well, I'll just, you know, that board disclaimer comment, that was, you know, I got that from Bob Butler. Word for word.
Yeah.
So.
It's good for legal, but it's maybe
Yeah.
not, it's not the second part of it. It's where, that's not like a free pass to allow you to say anything.
Personally attacks.
Yeah, I guess what I'm just saying, as a highly functioning board, we are better off if we speak with a unified voice. And that's after we've decided and deliberated on an issue.
I agree 100%.
Now, and again, if you're in the minority, you're more than free to state to anyone, here's why I voted the way I did. But again, I'm just telling you what Bob Butler suggesting as how boards best operate.
I strongly.
Yeah, I think that Bob Butler also says that after the decision has been made, you give your opinion, you don't go out in the community and keep saying, well, that's what the board did, but I didn't want that. You watch that, something's gonna happen, you know, now, because you didn't vote the way I did. You have to be careful of that too. That's not the
the way we should present a united front.
Yeah,
Just as one voice, just like you said.
yeah, no, I,
7 people, one voice.
Yeah.
Right.
but I also understand too, if you're in the minority, it's perfectly fine to express why you voted the way you did.
Sure.
He said that.
Yeah, right, once, we don't just keep bringing it up.
Agreed, Roseanne, that's a good point.
Then you're not a member of the board. You're keeping it.
Right.
That's not right.
So I'm hearing, at least as a consensus, that we want to get rid of board comments. Or we're going to ask people to individually email to us, or individually
We
board
hear the
members.
people screaming, the board comments email.
Good point. Good point.
Thank you, Barry, keep me out of trouble. And then I guess board members will just continue our practice of responding as you will, right? And then I guess I'd encourage board members to respond to people when they send emails with at least an acknowledgement, thank you for your email. Use your discretion, like we just talked about when you're responding to substantive questions. And I guess if it's a question that you do to the administration, send it on to Steve.
Which I think we do.
Yeah, I'm saying no. Good point, John.
Since we're still on this topic of public comment at board meetings, which is item B, that's what you're gonna go to next, correct?
Unless anyone else has anything on this topic, but I think we've kind of hammered through it. Steve's got one.
Just one quick thing too, I know both Jill and I are really trying to take pretty copious notes here. This is a discussion item though, tonight, which means we can do sort of a summary of, here's what you decided, you know, or it sounds like you kind of coalesced around this kind of as a process, and then put this in for the October 11th, for you to vote on essentially, because now tonight, this is discussion. So I just want to be clear about that we would, like, I'm not gonna get up tomorrow and go on text and pull board comments, because that wouldn't happen until after we officially made that action. Just
Perfect, Steve. Thanks for clarifying that at that point. Yeah, Taylor, you want to, why don't you lead this is your,
Well, I'll just start real quick with the policy. There's one thing, and again, this is not gonna change tonight, but under letter K, where it says the portion of the meeting during which comment of the public is invited shall be limited to 1 hour unless extended by a vote of the board. I guess we change that to say by a majority vote of the board. I mean, does anybody have any problem with that, or?
Well, it automatically is a majority vote, right?
Oh, sure, but
Why would you want to change the policy after the policy?
we don't have to, but it's just,
What does it add? I guess I'm not following. And vote by polls is majority.
sure, but I'm just looking, because, again,
Well, I'm not trying to pigeonhole them.
I know,
I'm
but
just saying
I'm
that they're concerned.
just saying, in the world we live in, people scrutinize everything. So I'm just looking to try to make sure that we are.
I'll throw
I know
this-
we're covered, but
yeah.
just, you know,
I'm fine with changing that, Taylor. I wouldn't do it on its own, but I believe we are going to address if you look at policy 167.3.
Yeah.
One thing right now our policy requires is that we require someone to say their name and address. And that's been discussed as, it is not necessarily a good practice to have someone give their address.
well, I think we still need to obviously document it, so they are for sure vetted. Well, again, they could just lie and give an address. I mean, we've seen that at meetings before with certain people, but I guess that kind of ties into the public comment form. This is a form that I designed off of what we had in a couple other districts. One thing I'd like to add would be like an address section where they actually write their address down, so we have it documented. But when the person goes to stand up, you know, they can just say, I'm so-and-so, Burlington resident, and say your comment. But this could also be used for people that can't make meetings, want to fill this out, and then that way, you know, we receive it, and we have a copy of it, or you could have a designated, you know, person that wants to speak, and you have to approve. And again, it doesn't have to be this form. This is something that was just, I found, and I thought, and listing to people in the community that they're not comfortable with listing their addresses, especially with some of the meetings streamed online, because of comments that obviously I've shown everybody.
Well, I think that makes sense, as long as the form is filled out in its entirety.
Yep.
Address on the form, and that when Peter calls the person to the podium or the next person to the podium, he knows we have their name and address.
Yep.
And obviously, if we vet that address and that's not where they live, then they'll be censored. right? Public comment.
Or, you know, if the form's not completed, like you said, I mean, we're asking them to fill out, you know, this.
We're not letting, let's not get publicly announced over the internet.
Yeah, I forgot what it was, but there was somebody who brought up this concern. I know there was a member of the public that brought it up, and I think someone said too, it's really a bad practice to require someone to state their address publicly before they give a call.
Well, it didn't used to be, but now it is, because of the way the world has changed.
I think it's a wise precaution.
Yeah.
To require that.
I'd like to see that one or two.
It's in our, it's attached.
Yeah, so that-
It's, if you look at, item for discussion 3B in the executive comment, the form is, I think it's a good form.
So, I mean, you know, it has our, obviously our mission statement, it has our, you know, protected class statement, things like that. And it takes stuff from some of our policy, but again, it doesn't have to be this exact form, this is just meant as a template for discussion, you know. Again, I'm not setting the stone with this, but I think this is a good first step.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think if that's a concern.
I know, that's, yeah, yeah.
It's gonna be added later.
So you're gonna add the address.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, something to keep in mind, and it's not the end of the world, but we have to be cognizant of it. This is an open record. It has to be stored by the districts in perpetuity.
So, how are they doing that with board comments, because those are all,
Name and address.
but I get your point of, like, you know, if you get this paper form, it has to stand in, and, or say, whatever.
It's just more than asking.
And that's what we are doing now, Taylor. We take all, like if an email comes in and say this PDF is logged in, and it's actually housed in Board Docs, that's where it lives, so that's essentially a permanent record and it doesn't go anywhere. And Board Docs houses that for us. So we would, in this case, should that be what happens as a public comment form, we would scan all of those, we'd update them and include them in what is essentially the record of the meeting.
So this would be, I believe would be required a policy change, so this would be something we'd have to have 2 meetings, like, as you know, to change our policy. But I'd suggest at our next meeting, we take this up as a first reading then, because right now we're doing discussion only.
Then we can add, is that?
We can add majority vote, because we're
Yeah.
changing that policy anyways,
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine with that,
Yeah.
that clarification. But we'll discuss more at our next board meeting, so we'll have a discussion, just thoughts. Any other, before we move on? To the policy? The first change would be taking out the address requirement. And the second one would be where it says by the vote of the school board, it says to be by majority vote. So that-
And at which point at the reading,
So
I'm sorry, at the meeting, yeah.
And at the form being, how would the form get incorporated in that policy too?
The form, I don't know if it would be, because that, Taylor, I think that's just the form that we would have at the entrance of the meeting, it's just a protocol.
So they still need to put their address in the form. You're just saying,
But would you wanna make, what I'm saying is, would you wanna make the form a part of the policy so that in the event they say, well, I'm not filling out that form, I'm just gonna state my name, it's not part of your policy.
Yeah, I think it needs to be included in the policy, so we have some concrete backup.
Yeah, I think we need the address, leave that in the policy. No, we don't have to say their address, or they don't have to say it, but as long as they write it down, if we have it,
We'll just incorporate the
It's
form
in-
in the policy.
it's important to have that address so we know the campus.
The form is
Part of
filled-
our school district.
The form is filled out in its entirety.
I agree, I think we're all in line here.
Yeah,
Right now,
we'll
the way the
change
policy
that.
reads is they have to state their name and address, we're gonna delete that address part.
State the name.
Right, and that will incorporate the
The
form.
form in its entirety.
Yeah.
We want them to still give their address, definitely.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Steve's gonna summarize.
All right, so just to be clear, because I want to make sure that if for October to be able to prepare what a first reading would be. So this is policy 0167.3, we would adjust letter K to read a majority of the board. We would adjust the policy, and we'll do a full read because it's actually a full page, right? To make sure that it speaks of completing the public comment form available. And then the third add is that the form would be edited to include the address, but in the policy, we would then remove language about reading your address aloud because of the form. So we'll just clean that up for a first read. Okay.
All set?
I don't want to belabor the point. I still am not following the majority portion for K. And I know you're thoughtful, and I know you think these things through, so there's got to be some sort of reasoning behind the side. I'm not following.
No, I mean, there's just no reasoning, it's just more or less, we don't have to change it, I mean, it's fine, I mean, obviously, the letter speaks for itself, but I'm thinking of just how people twist things now on both sides.
No, I get it entirely.
So, I mean, I'd rather just have something that, I mean, I know it's self-explanatory, I'm not an idiot, but I'm just looking,
It doesn't
that's what we
change,
have to do, we have to scrutinize everything.
it doesn't change the ability of the board to suspend comments.
Correct. No, yeah.
It requires a majority to extend comments.
Yeah.
That was just a little.
So,
That's at the board.
Okay, anything else on that one?
Which is, again, I know it's the same thing, but
Let's tackle item 3C, outcome when school board vote is a tie. Susan brought this up. We had an issue that came up, it's like 6 months ago now, I think it's been a while, but we had tackled, I forgot what the topic was, but we had, that's really not the issue here.
I wasn't there.
How do we, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's really immaterial what the topic was or who was there or not, but what happens when there's only 6 members here and we have a vote? I think what happened was that item got pushed off a couple of times. At some point, we said, let's just vote because we're kind of done with the topic, right? And after a couple meetings, and it ended up in a 3-3 tie, which by default means it fails because you need a majority. That's not a majority. Do we want to change that, I guess is the question. Where if you have 6 members, you hold things over. So I'll throw that out as a topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it fails.
so it does fail, it's just a matter of whether or not you want to bring it back up.
The problem with that, Kevin, would be then if you only had 6 members at a board meeting, which is a quorum, you can have 5 or more, then you really couldn't take action. You might have a hard time taking action on it, because you could have a 3-3 tie.
Well, you wouldn't be able to take action to the next one.
Yeah.
What would be an alternative?
Right now, it is what it is. If you get to a meeting, it's 3-3, you don't, it fails.
What about a write-in?
What do you mean to write it?
From a board, from a just non-present board member?
Our policies don't allow that. You can't vote by proxy. But that's an idea. I think in that case too, Kevin, I think we did hold it over for a couple meetings. I can't remember why, but it was one of those where we're just like, okay, we need to be done with this now. 'Cause I'm open to ideas though.
So why can't we go by proxy? I mean, I know it's not in the policy, but what's wrong with that?
I would say there's pluses and minuses to this, I'd say, but I'd say one thing would be hard for a board member who's not involved in the discussion around it to give an informed vote. I think that's the reason.
They wouldn't hear the entire conversation.
The deliberations or potentially the administrative presentation if there is one, or the public comments, potentially.
And maybe they be separate or they can't give a vote, or they can't reach,
True.
to make it flexible.
So if you put off the vote to the next meeting when the person that was absent is there, then the vote could be taken, all 7 members.
I guess I could see a scenario though, and it may not be with this board because we generally have all 7 come. But let's say in the future we have a board where you have a member missing periodically, you could be hamstrung from taking action. So I could see that as a possible problem.
But if it's an item of strong interest, couldn't you put that item out, and if the person can go in via the web, attend the meeting via like Zoom. Let's say it's a really hot topic, you don't want to push it off again. Board president contacts the board member that's out of town and says, what day can you call in? We need to have a special board meeting to get this.
Oh, yeah, we allow
discuss
that.
this topic.
Yeah, Kevin, we can do that right now.
Yeah, I think that's the best of both worlds, is to hold a special meeting for that vote only. But I think ideally, it'd be nice if it would be able to be held open as opposed to fail and have to bring it up to the whole process all over again. I don't know if that's possible.
I think it is, if you know going into a vote where it's likely to fall.
Yeah.
We often do, because based on our comments, we can kind of figure it out. I think in that case, respectfully, I think we did hold it open for a couple months, and then at some point we said, okay, we gotta vote. And that's where we're at right now. So I'm not sure what the right answer here is.
Well, so if, let's say we are in a situation like we just had, obviously, or like we have had that last year, we don't have to wait 2 weeks or a month. I mean, to his point, you can just, you can contact everybody and say, does Thursday work for you to have a quick, special meeting? We have, obviously, state statutes to say that we can, post a meeting within 24 hours, and things like that can happen. I think the main thing is waiting 2 weeks or a month. It's way too long. I mean, if he can't make, tonight, but he can make Wednesday, the rest of us can make Wednesday, then let's do it. If we can post it legally, which we can't, obviously, but I think that's what this point was, right? Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion here, what I think would make the most sense? Because I think what you're suggesting makes sense to Kayla. I'm not saying it doesn't. I guess as a practical matter, I think we would take every effort if there was a controversial issue that was close, where it's like a 3-3, we would try as a practical matter to say, let's hold this over to the next meeting. But I don't think we should change our policy necessarily on this, because I think it would be pretty complicated.
No, but I think it just requires extra effort on board president's part to be sure if you cannot attend in person, to attend via Zoom, make it the first agenda item. The person's in Cancun and they'll call in, because we're gonna make it the first agenda item, it's gonna be at 7 o'clock, call in.
I won't go to Cancun.
Well, I'm just giving examples where people are on vacation, but it's a hot item, and they can call in for 20 minutes, but they're not gonna call in and sit.
Yeah, I guess that's exactly my suggestion, is
Yeah.
as a board president, whoever's board president in the future, make an effort then to try to avoid a tie vote. If you see the discussion heading that way,
Yeah,
postpone it or try to get the person to call in or do what you
try and
can.
push the item as high up.
But I don't know if we should change our policies,
No, I
because I think that'd be administratively difficult to figure out how we do it fairly. Does that seem sensible to the board members?
When I served on the bank board, that item, those kind of things would come up. There's a loan approval that has to get through, and a board member is out of touch, out of reach, can't attend, have a scheduled meeting, call in, make it the first agenda item, get that discussion done, and then they can go on and right away.
Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to the outcome we're all expecting. I just want to make sure their policy is following the law. Technically, our policy says it's titled, it fails. And technically, it doesn't get carried over, it doesn't get carried over, it starts all over again.
Right.
So if we want to change it so things are going to get carried over, we need to adjust the policy to make sure it complies with the law.
I don't think that's accurate, Barry, in that I believe we held over those topics before we voted.
Yeah.
We never voted and never said, okay, because we knew at one point, we're like, oh, this looks like it's a 3-3.
No, there were times where we voted.
Yeah.
And it was Diane's last meeting,
Mhm.
and she voted and it resulted in 3-3, because we didn't, I'm sorry, so 3-3, yeah, that had been, because we were one board member short.
And then we held it over because we knew some new board members coming on, so.
I don't know if that was the
That
reason,
was-
it's just,
yeah, that
it's
was
just,
the one, so.
It was a policy reading.
Yeah.
And technically, it should have gone all the way back to first reading. None of us want to do that. It just hamstrings administration. It makes a mess for the board. But we need to make sure our policy is aligned so that we can do it the way we want to do it. I like what Kevin was saying. I just want to make sure that we can do it.
But if we know that, yeah, that's not, I don't know, it's going to be so time, so
We can't hear you over here.
Yeah, he said, he needs to say, you can motion
We can motion out of that,
to tie up.
because you're in discussion at that point. So
Sure. Right.
the deal is that
You can motion.
it's gonna,
Motion to postpone, or, you know, you can wait.
I agree completely. I'm just saying if something does go to the vote, that ends up 3-3. Technically, it's
You gotta go back to one.
Yes.
which is not fun, but
I think in that case, Barry, we had already done a first reading, if I remember this right, and then we voted in favor of the first reading, right? And then the second
second voting until the second voting.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, maybe you're right then. Okay, we'll be careful on that. Okay. Are we all in alignment on this? We're not really gonna touch anything policy-wise in this issue, but we're gonna be careful protocol-wise. Anything else? I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Or adjourned.
Then we should.
Yeah,
We learned